He walked through the glass doors wearing paint-stained work boots and a faded construction jacket with concrete dust still clinging to the sleeves. His calloused hands gripped an old rifle case that looked like it had survived 3 garage sales. The crowd at Ironclad Precision Range didn't just stare, they laughed. Some pointed. Others whispered and pulled out their phones. Already imagining the viral mockery, the reigning champion, dressed in $1,000 tactical gear, smirked and made a show of offering him charity. Land one bullseye, old timer, and I'll give you 10 grand right now. The construction worker said nothing. He simply opened his battered case, chambered a single round, and steadied his breath. When he pulled the trigger, the sound didn't just echo across the range. It shattered every assumption in the room. What followed wasn't applause. It was stunned, absolute silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the half-finished office complex, where Landon Blake had spent the last 8 hours hauling steel, beams and mixing concrete. His hands, rough and scarred from years of hard labor, were caked with dried cement that had worked its way into every crease and callus. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm, leaving a streak of gray dust across his tanned skin. The foreman's voice crackled through the job site radio, calling an end to the Saturday shift. Landon peeled off his work gloves and stuffed them into the pocket of his faded denim jacket, the one with the torn shoulder seam he kept meaning to stitch but never found time for. His truck, a '98 Chevy that had seen better decades, sat in the gravel lot beneath a cluster of oak trees. The paint had faded from red to a sun-bleached orange, and the passenger door still stuck from an accident 3 winters ago that he never bothered to fix properly. He climbed into the driver's seat, the springs groaning under his weight, and checked his phone. One message from Lily, his 12-year-old daughter. "Dad, you promised we'd go today. Please don't forget." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both warmth and weariness. He hadn't forgotten. He never forgot when it came to her. Landon drove through the industrial district of Copper Hill, past the shuttered factories and chain-link fences tagged with graffiti, toward the nicer part of town where the streets were lined with boutique coffee shops and yoga studios. He didn't belong in that world, and he knew it. But today wasn't about him. It was about Lily and the promise he'd made after her mother passed 2 years ago. He'd promised to teach her strength, not the loud kind that demanded attention, but the quiet kind that endured. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the parking lot of Ironclad Precision Range, an upscale shooting facility that looked more like a resort than a place for firearms training. The building was sleek, modern, all tinted glass and brushed steel, with a fountain out front and perfectly manicured hedges lining the walkway. Luxury SUVs and sports cars filled the lot, their chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. Landon's truck looked like a relic from another era, sputtering as he turned off the ignition. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her brown eyes wide as she took in the scene. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, one that had belonged to her mother, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her sneakers were scuffed, the laces frayed, but her face glowed with excitement mixed with nervousness. "Dad, this place looks fancy," she said quietly. Landon glanced at her, his expression softening. "It is, but we're not here to impress anyone, remember?" She nodded, clutching the straps of her backpack. "I know. We're here because you said I needed to see what real focus looks like." He reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's right. No matter what anyone says or how they look at us, you keep your head up, deal?" "Deal." They stepped out of the truck, and Landon reached into the truck bed, pulling out a long, battered rifle case wrapped in old canvas. The case was held together with duct tape and fraying straps, and it looked like it had been through a war, which, in a way, it had. Inside was a rifle he hadn't touched in years, a tool from a life he'd left behind when he traded his uniform for a hard hat. As they walked toward the entrance, Landon felt the weight of eyes turning toward them. A group of men in tactical vests and designer sunglasses stood near the entrance, laughing and comparing their gear. One of them, a younger guy with perfectly styled hair and a smartwatch that probably cost more than Landon's monthly rent, elbowed his buddy and nodded in their direction. "Check it out," the guy muttered, barely keeping his voice down. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on the way to the junkyard." His friends snickered. Landon didn't react. He'd learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth the energy. Lily glanced up at him, her face tight with embarrassment, but Landon just gave her a reassuring nod and kept walking. Inside, the range was even more extravagant than the exterior suggested. The floors were polished marble, the walls lined with digital screens displaying leaderboards, competition stats, and promotional videos of shooters in slow motion, their faces chiseled and confident. Glass cases displayed custom firearms that cost more than Landon made in 6 months. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in a crisp black uniform, her name tag reading Mia Davis, Range Operations Manager. She had sharp eyes and an air of authority that suggested she didn't miss much. Landon approached the desk, Lily trailing just behind him. The woman looked up from her computer, her gaze sweeping over his dusty construction jacket, his worn boots, and the ancient rifle case slung over his shoulder. Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Help you?" she asked, her tone professional but guarded. "Here for the open session," Landon said. "My daughter wanted to watch." Mia's eyes shifted to Lily, who offered a small, nervous smile. The woman's expression softened just slightly. "Sign in here. Safety waiver and ID." Landon pulled out his driver's license and scrawled his name across the waiver. Mia glanced at the ID, then back at him, her brow furrowing for just a second before she slid it back across the counter. "Lane assignments are first come, first serve," she said. "Rules are posted. Eye and ear protection mandatory. No exceptions." Landon nodded, took the visitor badges she handed him, and led Lily toward the range floor. The shooting area was vast, with 24 lanes separated by reinforced glass partitions. Shooters lined the stations, some practicing rapid-fire drills, others zeroing in scopes on distant targets. The air smelled like gun oil and spent brass, and the steady crack of gunfire echoed through the space, despite the noise dampening. Lily flinched at the first shot, and Landon placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You'll get used to it," he said quietly. "Just focus on your breathing, like I taught you." They found an empty bench near the far end of the range, away from the main crowd. Landon set down the rifle case and helped Lily into a pair of oversized ear protectors. She looked tiny in them, almost comical, but she straightened her back and tried to look brave. "Can I watch from here?" she asked. "Right here's perfect," Landon replied. "Stay behind the line and don't touch anything unless I say so." She nodded. Hugging her backpack to her chest like a shield, Landon unzipped the rifle case slowly, the sound of the old zipper cutting through the noise around them. Inside, nestled in worn foam padding, was a bolt-action rifle, military issue from another lifetime. The wood stock was dark with age and oil, the metal parts worn smooth from years of use. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive. But it had been reliable when it mattered most. He lifted it carefully, checking the action out of habit, and a few heads turned in his direction. Whispers started to circulate. Someone nearby chuckled. Landon ignored them all, his focus narrowing to the rifle in his hands and the promise he'd made to the girl, sitting just a few feet away. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. This was about showing Lily that strength didn't need to be loud. That skill didn't require the most expensive tools. And that sometimes the quietest person in the room was the one who had already fought the hardest battles. He set the rifle on the bench, took a slow breath, and prepared to step onto the firing line. The firing line at ironclad precision range felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone had been issued costumes, and Landon Blake hadn't gotten the memo. All around him, shooters wore matching tactical gear, embroidered with brand logos and sponsored patches. Their weapons gleamed under the overhead LED lighting, custom builds with carbon fiber stocks, titanium triggers, and scopes that looked like they belonged on satellites. Everything was pristine, calculated, and expensive. Landon stood at lane 17, the furthest from the main crowd, his faded construction jacket still dusted with concrete powder. His boots left faint gray prints on the polished floor. The rifle on the bench in front of him looked like a relic, something that belonged in a history museum rather than a premium shooting facility. The wooden stock was scratched and darkened with years of handling, and the metal components showed the telltale wear of heavy use. There were no fancy modifications, no digital attachments, just iron sights and a bolt action that required patience and practice to operate smoothly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lily sat behind him on a bench designed for spectators, her legs swinging nervously as she watched the other shooters. A young woman 2 lanes over was filming herself with a mounted phone, striking poses between rounds and checking her angles. A man in his 40s wearing wraparound sunglasses indoors barked instructions to his teenage son about breathing techniques, his voice loud enough to carry across half the range. Everything here was performance, spectacle, content for social media, or bragging rights at the country club. Mia Davis, the operations manager, stood near the control booth with her arms crossed, watching the floor with a sharp, evaluating gaze. She'd seen thousands of shooters come through these doors, mostly wealthy hobbyists looking for a thrill or businessmen trying to impress clients. But something about the man in the construction jacket didn't fit the usual profile. She'd noticed the way he moved, deliberate and economical, no wasted motion. She'd seen the name on his ID, Landon Blake. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. A commotion drew her attention toward the center of the range. Bryce Chambers had arrived. Bryce wasn't just a regular at Ironclad Precision, he was the face of the place. His photo was printed on banners hanging from the rafters, action shots of him mid-competition with his signature rifle raised in victory. He held every house record, had won 3 regional championships in the last 2 years, and his instructional videos had racked up millions of views online. Bryce was in his early 30s, movie star handsome with a sharp jawline and perfectly styled hair that somehow stayed in place even under a tactical cap. He wore custom gear that looked like it cost more than a used car, all matte black with neon green accents and his initials stitched across the chest. "Yo, make some room," Bryce called out as he strode onto the range floor, flanked by 2 friends who looked like they'd been plucked from a fitness magazine. The real show's about to start. A ripple of excitement spread through the crowd. Phones came out. People repositioned themselves to get a better view. Bryce soaked it all in, flashing a practiced smile and giving a casual salute to a cluster of admirers near lane 5. He set up at lane 10, right in the center of the range where everyone could watch. His rifle case was a sleek carbon fiber shell with LED strips that glowed when he opened it. Inside was a masterpiece of modern engineering, a custom bolt-action rifle with a digital scope, adjustable cheek rest, and a price tag that could have fed a family for months. Bryce assembled it with theatrical precision, making sure every move was visible to his audience. "Let's warm up with something easy," he announced. Loading a magazine and cycling the bolt with a satisfying metallic snap dot, the crowd watched as Bryce fired a rapid succession of 5 shots at a target 100 yards downrange. Each shot landed within the inner ring, tight grouping, textbook accuracy. Applause broke out. Someone whistled. Bryce grinned and gave a mock bow. "That's how it's done, folks," he said, his voice amplified by the natural acoustics of the range. Precision, power, and a little bit of style. It was then that Bryce's eyes drifted down the line of shooters, scanning the lanes with the casual arrogance of someone who owned the space. His gaze landed on lane 17, and he paused. The man standing there looked wildly out of place. Dusty jacket, old rifle, no tactical vest, no high-tech scope, nothing that screamed serious shooter. Bryce's grin widened. "Hey," Bryce called out, loud enough for half the range to hear. "You lost, buddy?" The hardware store's 2 blocks down. Laughter erupted from his entourage. A few other shooters glanced over, smirking. Landon didn't respond. He was running a cleaning rod through the barrel of his rifle, methodical and unhurried, as if Bryce's voice was just background noise. Bryce wasn't used to being ignored. He stepped away from his lane and sauntered toward Landon, his friends trailing behind like an entourage. The crowd sensed entertainment and began to drift closer, forming a loose semicircle around lane 17. "I'm talking to you, Gramps," Bryce said, stopping a few feet away. "That thing even fire, or is it just for show?" Landon glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable, then returned his attention to the rifle. "It fires." "Oh, it talks," Bryce said with mock surprise, drawing more chuckles from the onlookers. "Tell you what, old-timer, I'm feeling generous today. You put 1 round on target, just 1, and I'll buy you a new jacket. That one looks like it's been through a wood chipper." The crowd snickered. Someone whispered, "This is gonna be good." Lily's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. She gripped the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. She wanted to say something, to defend her father, but Landon had taught her to stay calm, to let actions speak louder than words. Landon finished cleaning the barrel and set the rod aside. He straightened up, meeting Bryce's gaze for the first time. His eyes were calm, steady, the kind of calm that came from years of controlling fear and adrenaline in situations. Far more dangerous than a shooting range full of egos. "Not interested," Landon said simply. Bryce's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to people turning him down, especially not in front of a crowd. His pride flared. "Not interested?" Bryce repeated, his tone shifting to something sharper. "Or not capable?" The range had gone quieter now, the background chatter fading as more people tuned into the confrontation. Even Mia Davis stepped forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. Landon didn't take the bait. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box of ammunition, old military surplus rounds in a weathered cardboard container. He opened it slowly, selected a single round, and held it up to the light, inspecting it with care. Bryce scoffed. "You're really gonna shoot that antique? Man, this is gonna be embarrassing." Landon loaded the round into the rifle's chamber and closed the bolt with a smooth, practiced motion. He didn't look at Bryce. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked downrange, toward the target 100 yards away. A simple paper bullseye that had been used and reused throughout the day. "Dad," Lily's voice was small but clear, cutting through the tension. "You don't have to." Landon turned to her, and for a moment, the noise of the range seemed to fade completely. He saw the worry in her eyes, the fear that he might be humiliated, that the people who'd already mocked them would have more ammunition. But he also saw something else, belief. She believed in him, even when no one else in the building did. He gave her a small nod. A silent promise that everything would be okay. Then he turned back to the firing line, shouldered the old rifle, and took a breath. The entire range seemed to hold its breath with him. Bryce Chambers stood with his arms crossed. A smug grin plastered across his face as he watched Landon Blake settle into position at lane 17. This was going to be entertaining. The guy looked like he'd wandered in from a construction site, which, based on the concrete dust still clinging to his jacket, He probably had. Bryce had dealt with guys like this before. Weekend warriors who thought their years in the service meant they could still hang with the pros. They always learned the hard way that time and rust didn't care about past glory. "Somebody get this on video," Bryce said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I want proof when this goes sideways." A few people pulled out their phones, angling for the best shot. The atmosphere had shifted from casual practice to full-blown spectacle. Even the shooters at the far end of the range had stopped what they were doing to watch. Mia Davis remained near the control booth, her expression unreadable but her posture tense, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. Landon ignored all of it. He'd been in hostile environments before, places where people's lives depended on his ability to shut out distraction and focus on the task at hand. A shooting range full of rich civilians with expensive hobbies didn't even register on his scale of pressure. He adjusted his stance slightly, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced. His hands moved with the kind of unconscious precision that came from muscle memory drilled in over thousands of repetitions. The rifle felt familiar in his grip despite the years since he'd last held it. The wood stock, worn smooth by his palms, seemed to mold to his shoulder. The iron sights, simple and unadorned, aligned with his eye as naturally as breathing. He didn't need digital readouts or laser rangefinders. He'd learned to shoot in places where technology failed, and all you had left was skill, patience, and the willingness to trust yourself completely. Bryce leaned against the partition of lane 16, still talking. "Tell you what, Construction Joe, make this shot and I'll personally upgrade you to a real rifle. Something from this century." More laughter. Someone in the back yelled, "Give him a chance, Bryce." "I am giving him a chance," Bryce shot back with exaggerated magnanimity. "That's why I'm standing here instead of just walking away." Lily watched from her seat, her hands clenched together so tightly her fingernails dug into her palms. She wanted to scream at all of them, to tell them they had no idea who her father was, what he'd done, what he'd survived. But she stayed silent, remembering what he'd told her on the drive over. Sometimes the best response to noise is silence. Let your actions be the only argument you need. Be the only argument you need. Landon's breathing slowed. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. It was a rhythm he'd learned in sniper training, a way to lower his heart rate and steady his hands. The world began to narrow, the peripheral noise fading into a dull hum. The target downrange came into sharp focus, the black circle of the bullseye standing out against the white paper. He felt the weight of the rifle, the slight resistance of the trigger under his finger. He knew exactly how much pressure it would take, knew the exact moment the sear would release and send the firing pin forward. There was no guesswork, no hesitation. Just mechanics and timing. Bryce's voice cut through the silence one more time. "Any day now, Gramps. Some of us have actual practice to get back to." Landon exhaled one final time. And in that space between breaths where the body is perfectly still, he squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was sharp and singular, echoing through the range like a thunderclap. The report was different from the high-tech firearms around them. Deeper, more resonant, the sound of old-school gunpowder doing its job without electronic assistance. For a moment, no one moved. The target downrange didn't show any obvious indication of a hit from this distance. The crowd waited, some already preparing to laugh, others pulling up their phone screens to zoom in. Then the automated target system kicked in, pulling the paper target forward on its mechanical track so it could be inspected up close. The paper slid along the overhead rail, traveling the 100-yard distance in smooth, mechanical silence. As it approached the firing line, details became visible. There was a single hole in the paper, dead center dot not just in the bullseye, but in the exact middle of the bullseye, a perfect puncture that had torn through the tiny dot at the heart of the target. The range went silent. Bryce's smirk vanished. He pushed off the partition and walked closer to the target, staring at it as if it might be some kind of trick. His friends exchanged confused glances. The crowd, which had been poised for mockery, now stood frozen in collective shock. Mia Davis straightened from her position near the control booth, her eyes widening slightly. She'd seen thousands of shots fired at ironclad precision, countless bullseyes and near misses, but she'd rarely seen a cold bore shot. The very first round through a barrel that day land with that kind of precision. It was the hardest shot to make because the barrel hadn't been warmed up. The rifle hadn't been zeroed for the day's conditions. And this guy had done it with iron sights and ammunition that looked like it had been sitting in a garage for a decade. One person started clapping, slow and deliberate. Then another. Within seconds, a wave of genuine applause rippled through the crowd. Not the performative kind that Bryce usually commanded, but the kind that came from witnessing something unexpected and undeniable. Lily's face broke into the biggest smile Landon had seen in months. She wanted to run to him, to hug him, but she stayed in her seat, respecting the range rules. Her eyes shining with pride. Landon ejected the spent casing, caught it in his palm, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply began to disassemble his rifle with the same quiet efficiency he'd used to set it up. Bryce stood there, staring at the target, his jaw tight. His entire persona was built on being the best, the champion, the guy everyone came to watch. And this nobody, this construction worker in a dusty jacket with a rifle older than half the people in the building, had just made a shot that was cleaner than anything Bryce had done all day. "Lucky shot," Bryce finally said. But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Landon didn't respond. He placed the disassembled rifle back into its case and zipped it closed. Bryce couldn't let it go. His pride wouldn't allow it. He stepped forward, his voice louder now, trying to reclaim control of the room. "One shot doesn't mean anything. Anyone can get lucky once." Landon looked up at him, his expression still calm, still measured. "I didn't come here to compete with you." "Then what did you come here for?" Bryce demanded. Landon glanced over at Lily, who was watching him with those wide, trusting eyes. "To show my daughter that you don't need the fanciest equipment or the loudest voice to hit your target. You just need to know what you're aiming at and why it matters." The simplicity of the answer seemed to catch Bryce off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but found himself with nothing to say. The crowd had shifted now, no longer looking at him as the center of attention, but at the quiet man packing up his old rifle. Mia Davis stepped forward, weaving through the crowd until she stood at lane 17. "That was an impressive shot," she said, her tone professional but genuine. "Thank you," Landon replied simply. She studied him for a moment, then asked, "You military?" "Used to be." She nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. "Sniper?" Landon hesitated, then gave a small nod. Bryce, who had been listening, let out a forced laugh. "Oh, so that's the secret. Should have led with that, man. Makes the whole thing less impressive when you've got professional training." Landon turned to face him fully for the first time. Training doesn't pull the trigger. Discipline does. And discipline doesn't care how much your gear costs. The words landed like a slap. Bryce's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The crowd watched in tense silence, waiting to see how he'd respond. "You think you're better than me?" Bryce said, his voice low and edged with anger. "I didn't say that." "Then prove you're not just a one-trick pony," Bryce snapped. 10 rounds. 10 targets. Let's see if that old rifle can keep up. Landon shook his head. "I'm not here to prove anything to you. Scared?" Bryce pressed, sensing weakness. Lily's voice, small but clear, cut through the tension. "He's not scared of you." Every head turned toward her. She stood up from the bench, clutching her backpack, her chin lifted in defiance despite the tremor in her voice. "My dad isn't scared of anything. He just doesn't need to show off. Bryce looked at her, then back at Landon, and something cruel flickered in his eyes. That your kid? Maybe you should teach her not to write checks you can't cash. The temperature in the room dropped. Landon's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A subtle shift, a tightening of the shoulders, a stillness that felt dangerous. Mia Davis recognized it immediately and stepped between them. All right, that's enough, she said firmly. Bryce, back to your lane. Sir, you're welcome to continue practicing if you'd like, but let's keep this civil. Bryce held Landon's gaze for another long moment, then turned away with a dismissive wave. Whatever. One lucky shot from a has-been. I've got real training to do. But as he walked back to his lane, the crowd didn't follow him the way they usually did. They lingered near lane 17, watching Landon with new eyes, curiosity replacing mockery. Landon knelt down beside Lily and placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay? She nodded, blinking back tears of frustration. I didn't like the way he talked to you. I know. But we're not here for him. We're here for us. She hugged him tightly, and he held her for a moment, before standing back up. He glanced at the rifle case, then at Mia, who was still standing nearby. Is the range open for another hour? He asked. 2 hours, Mia replied. Landon nodded. Then we'll stay. I'd like to show my daughter a few more things. Mia smiled faintly. Lane 17's yours for as long as you want it. As Landon began to set up again, Bryce watched from across the range, his jaw clenched. His mind already racing with ways to reassert his dominance. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 20 minutes passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Landon had returned to his bench at lane 17, methodically walking Lily through the basics of rifle maintenance. He showed her how to clean the barrel, how to check the firing pin, how to inspect each round for defects before loading. His voice was low and patient, the kind of teaching that came from genuine care rather than obligation. Lily listened intently, asking questions that showed she was absorbing every word around them. The atmosphere at Ironclad Precision Range had shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Shooters who had been focused on their own practice now found excuses to drift closer to lane 17. Some pretended to adjust their gear. Others walked past on their way to the water fountain, stealing glances at the man in the dusty construction jacket. The mockery had evaporated, replaced by curiosity and something that looked like respect. Bryce Chambers, however, was a different story. He stood at lane 10, surrounded by his usual entourage, but the energy had changed. His friends still laughed at his jokes, still nodded along with his commentary, but there was a forced quality to it now, like actors who knew the script had been rewritten, but were trying to pretend otherwise. Bryce loaded magazine after magazine, firing rapid sequences at targets, his technique flawless, his groupings tight. But every few minutes, his eyes would drift down the line toward lane 17, and his jaw would tighten. Mia Davis watched it all from her position near the control booth. She'd been managing Ironclad Precision for 3 years, long enough to recognize when ego was about to become a problem. Bryce had always been competitive, sometimes aggressively so, but she'd never seen him this rattled. The way he kept glancing at Landon reminded her of a fighter who'd just taken an unexpected punch and was trying to decide whether to retreat or double down. She pulled out her tablet and did something she rarely did during open sessions. She accessed the range's database and ran a search on the name from Landon's ID, Landon Blake. The system pulled up his registration information. Standard background check clearance, firearm safety certification from years ago. Nothing remarkable. But Mia had learned to trust her instincts. And her instincts told her there was more to this story. She switched to a different database. One that wasn't public. A military service verification system that the range subscribed to for insurance purposes. She entered his name and date of birth. The results loaded slowly, and when they appeared, Mia felt her eyebrows rise. Landon Blake, former Marine Corps, scout sniper. 2 deployments. Honorable discharge, decorated. The file didn't include details about specific operations. That information was classified, but it included enough to paint a picture. This wasn't just some veteran who'd done basic rifle training. This was someone who'd operated at the highest level of precision, shooting under the worst possible conditions. Mia closed the tablet and looked back at lane 17, where Landon was now letting Lily hold the unloaded rifle, guiding her hands to the proper grip, showing her how to align the sights. He moved with the patience of someone who understood that teaching wasn't about showing off what you knew, but about making sure the other person understood. A commotion pulled Mia's attention back to the center of the range. Bryce had stepped away from his lane and was talking animatedly to a small group of spectators, his voice carrying across the space. "Look, I'm not saying the guy can't shoot," Bryce was saying, his tone reasonable but with an undercurrent of defensiveness. "I'm saying one shot doesn't prove anything. Consistency is what separates amateurs from professionals. Anyone can get lucky once." One of the spectators, an older man with silver hair and an expensive watch, nodded thoughtfully. "He did make it look pretty easy, though." "Easy?" Bryce scoffed. "The man took 30 seconds to line up one shot. In competition, you've got to be fast and accurate. Speed matters." Another voice chimed in, a younger woman who'd been filming earlier. "But wasn't it a cold bore shot? That's supposed to be the hardest, right?" Bryce waved a dismissive hand. "Depends on the rifle. Some of those old military guns are actually more forgiving because they're built for durability over precision. Modern competition rifles require more skill to master." It was masterful spin, the kind of subtle reframing that cast doubt without directly attacking. Mia had to give Bryce credit for his ability to manage his image. But she also noticed that not everyone was buying it. Several people in the crowd exchanged skeptical glances. Landon, for his part, seemed completely unaware of or unconcerned by the conversation happening 30 yards away. He'd finished the maintenance lesson with Lily and was now packing up the rifle case. Lily looked disappointed. "We're leaving already?" she asked. "We've been here almost an hour," Landon said gently. "You've got homework, and I promised Mrs. Chun I'd fix her porch railing before dark. But what about that guy?" Lily gestured vaguely toward Bryce. "Aren't you going to show him?" Landon knelt down so he was eye level with his daughter. "Show him what?" "That you're better than him." He smiled a sad, knowing smile. "I don't need to be better than him. I just need to be good enough for what matters. And what matters is you, getting you home safe, making sure our neighbors are taken care of. That's the target I'm aiming at." Lily considered this, her young face serious. "Mom would have said the same thing." "She would have," Landon agreed, his voice softening. "She was always better at keeping perspective than I was." He stood and slung the rifle case over his shoulder. They were halfway to the exit when a voice called out behind them. "Hey!" "Hold up." Landon turned to find Bryce walking toward them. His expression carefully neutral, his posture relaxed. But there was tension in his shoulders that betrayed the casualness he was projecting. "Yeah?" Landon said. Bryce stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, the picture of easy confidence. "Look, man, that was a good shot earlier. Really good. I might have been a little harsh with the jokes." Landon waited, saying nothing. Bryce continued. "Thing is, a lot of people here today are asking questions. About you, about me, about who's actually the best shooter at Ironclad. And I can't have that kind of doubt floating around. It's bad for business, bad for the range's reputation." "Not my problem," Landon said evenly. "It could be your opportunity, though," Bryce countered. "How about we settle this properly? Official challenge. 5 stations, different distances, different conditions. We do it right, score it fair, and whoever wins gets bragging rights." I'll even put up $5,000 to make it interesting. Landon shook his head. Not interested. Bryce's smile tightened. 10,000. Still no. Why not? Bryce pressed, frustration creeping into his voice. You scared you can't repeat that shot? Lily tensed beside her father, her hand gripping his jacket. Landon felt it and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I'm not scared, Landon said calmly. I'm just not interested in proving anything to you or anyone else here. I came to spend time with my daughter, and we're done. Bryce's expression hardened. You know what I think? I think you got lucky, and you know it. I think you're running away before someone calls your bluff. A small crowd had gathered now, sensing conflict. Phones were coming out again. Mia Davis started walking toward them, ready to intervene. Landon's voice remained level, almost gentle. Believe whatever you need to believe. It doesn't change anything for me. He turned to leave, but Bryce's next words stopped him cold. Must be tough, raising a kid alone. Teaching her to run away when things get challenging. The range went silent. Even the background noise of distant gunfire seemed to fade. Lily's eyes widened, and she looked up at her father, whose expression had gone very still. Landon turned back slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried weight that made several people step back instinctively. You can say whatever you want about me, Landon said. But you leave her out of it. Bryce held up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, I'm just saying, kids learn from example. If they see their parents backing down from challenges, what kind of lesson is that? Mia arrived at that moment, stepping between them. Bryce, that's enough. I'm just making conversation, Bryce said innocently. Mia turned to Landon. You don't have to engage with this. Landon looked at her, then at Lily, whose face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. He saw the way she was trying to hold back tears, trying to be brave. He thought about all the times over the past 2 years when she'd had to be brave, when she'd lost her mother and had to watch her father struggle to keep their world together. He thought about how hard she'd worked to believe in him, to trust that he could still be strong even when everything felt broken, and he thought about the promise he'd made, not just to her, but to the woman he'd loved and lost, to show their daughter that strength wasn't about domination or ego. It was about knowing when to walk away and when to stand your ground. He looked back at Bryce. 5 stations. 1 shot each. Winner takes nothing. This isn't about money. Bryce's eyes lit up. Then what's it about? Settling this so you'll leave us alone, Landon said simply. Bryce grinned, sensing victory. Deal. We do it next Saturday. Give me time to promote it properly. No promotion, Landon said firmly. We do it now or not at all. The grin faltered. Now? Right now. You wanted to settle it, so let's settle it. Bryce glanced around at the crowd, calculating. He'd wanted time to prepare, to build hype, to make sure the conditions favored him. But backing down now, in front of all these people, would be worse than accepting. Fine, Bryce said. Let's do it. Mia looked between them, then sighed. All right. I'll set up the course. But this is unofficial, not a sanctioned competition. Clear? Both men nodded. As the crowd began to buzz with excitement. Lily tugged on her father's jacket. Dad, you don't have to do this. Landon knelt down beside her. I know. But sometimes you have to stand up, not for yourself, but for the people you love. She hugged him tightly. Promise you'll be careful? Always, he whispered back. Mia Davis moved with efficient precision, her tablet in hand as she programmed the range's automated system. Within minutes, she'd configured 5 stations, each designed to test different aspects of marksmanship. The standard practice targets were replaced with competition-grade scoring boards, and the digital displays overhead flickered to life, ready to track every shot in real time. The crowd had swelled considerably. Word had spread through the facility that something significant was happening at Ironclad Precision, and shooters from the adjacent training rooms had filtered in, along with staff members on break and even a few people from the attached pro shop. The betting chatter had already started, quiet exchanges of cash and confident predictions. Most of the money was on Bryce. Landon stood at the staging area, checking his rifle one final time. The weapon was simple, almost primitive compared to Bryce's gleaming custom build, but every component was in perfect working order. He'd maintained this rifle religiously over the years, even when he'd sworn he was done with shooting. Done with everything that reminded him of sand and blood and the weight of decisions that cost lives. Lily sat on the bench behind him. Her backpack hugged her to her chest like armor. She wanted to be brave for him, but her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd never seen her father in competition with anyone. He was always so quiet, so content to stay in the background, to let others have the spotlight. Watching him step into this arena felt surreal and frightening. Bryce, meanwhile, was in his element. He worked the crowd like a performer, shaking hands, accepting well wishes, and posing for photos. His rifle case was open like a display, the carbon fiber gleaming, the custom components catching the light. He'd removed his tactical vest and replaced it with a fitted compression shirt that showed off his gym-sculpted physique. Everything about his presentation screamed professional athlete. "All right, listen up," Mia called out, her voice amplified through the range's PA system. "This is an informal challenge match between Bryce Chambers and Landon Blake. 5 stations, 1 shot per station. Scoring is based on accuracy, measured by the range's digital targeting system. Highest cumulative score wins. Any questions?" Bryce raised his hand with theatrical flair. "Just to clarify, we're shooting simultaneously, right? Not taking turns?" Mia nodded. "Correct. You'll both shoot from adjacent lanes at each station. Keeps it fair and saves time." "Perfect," Bryce said, flashing his signature grin to the crowd. Landon said nothing. He simply nodded his understanding and waited. Mia consulted her tablet. "Station 1, 50 yards, standing position, no support. Standard bullseye target. You'll have 30 seconds from the ready signal to take your shot." The 2 men moved to lanes 8 and 9. Bryce took his position with practiced showmanship, adjusting his stance multiple times, rolling his shoulders, performing breathing exercises that looked more like yoga than marksmanship prep. The crowd watched him with familiar admiration. Landon simply stood at his lane, rifle held loosely in a ready carry position, his eyes on the target downrange. There was no performance, no ritual, just quiet focus. The ready signal blinked green on the overhead display. The 30-second clock began counting down. Bryce moved first, bringing his rifle up smoothly, his movements textbook perfect. The digital scope on his weapon provided instant feedback, adjusting for distance and elevation automatically. He settled into his sight picture, his breathing controlled and measured. At the 15-second mark, he fired. The crack of his rifle was sharp and clean. The overhead display registered his shot immediately, 9.7 out of 10. The crowd applauded. Landon had barely moved. He stood still, watching the target, the rifle still at low ready. The clock ticked down. 20 seconds. 25 seconds. The crowd began to murmur, wondering if he'd forgotten to shoot. If he was freezing under pressure. At 28 seconds. Landon raised the rifle in one smooth motion, settled it against his shoulder, and fired. The movement was so fast it seemed like a single action rather than a sequence. The entire process took less than 2 seconds. The display registered. His shot, 10.0. Perfect center. The murmuring stopped. Several people in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. Bryce's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lucky timing," someone whispered. Mia's voice came over the PA. "Station 2, 100 yards. Kneeling position with barricade support. You have 45 seconds. They moved to the next station, where low barriers had been set up to simulate field conditions. This required adapting to the support structure, finding a stable position while kneeling. Managing the awkward angles. Bryce took his time. Testing different positions against the barricade, finding the optimal setup. He fired at the 30-second mark. The display showed 9.8. Excellent by any standard. The crowd cheered again. Landon knelt, rested the rifle on the barricade with minimal adjustment, and fired at the 40-second mark. 10.0. The cheering became more scattered, confused. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Bryce was the champion, the professional, the one with all the advantages. Yet this construction worker with an old rifle was matching and exceeding him with almost insulting ease. Bryce's jaw clenched. He could feel the narrative slipping away from him, could sense the crowd's attention shifting. This was supposed to be a demonstration of his superiority, a way to put the upstart back in his place and reassert his dominance. Instead, it was becoming something else entirely. Station 3, Mia announced. 150 yards, prone position, timed rapid fire. 3 shots in 60 seconds. Combined score. This was Bryce's specialty. Rapid fire required not just accuracy but speed, the ability to cycle the bolt, reacquire the target, and deliver consistent results under time pressure. This was where his modern rifle with its smooth action and advanced trigger system would give him a decisive advantage. They went prone. The clock started. Bryce fired his first shot at 12 seconds. 9.6. He cycled the bolt smoothly, reacquired, fired again at 28 seconds. 9.7. One more cycle, careful aim, and his third shot at 43 seconds. 9.8. Combined score. 29.1 out of 30. The crowd erupted. That was championship-level shooting. Several people whistled and applauded. Bryce allowed himself a small smile as he stood and dusted off his knees. Landon remained prone. His first shot came at 18 seconds. 10.0. The bolt action on his rifle was noticeably slower, requiring more manual manipulation. His second shot at 39 seconds. 10.0. He had 21 seconds left for the final shot. He took his time, breathing steadily, waiting for the perfect moment. At 57 seconds, he fired. 10.0. Combined score. 30.0. Perfect. The applause was louder this time. Spontaneous and genuine. Even some of Bryce's supporters were clapping now, unable to deny what they were witnessing. This wasn't luck. This was skill operating at a level most of them had never seen in person. Lily was on her feet. Her earlier fear transformed into pure pride. She wanted to shout, to cheer, but she remembered her father's teaching about staying composed. So she just smiled, the biggest, brightest smile. And when Landon glanced back at her after standing up, that smile was all the reward he needed. Bryce stood at his lane, staring at the display showing the scores. The crowd's energy had completely shifted now. They weren't watching a champion defend his title. They were watching an underdog story unfold in real time, and nothing captured people's imagination like watching the impossible become possible. Mia's voice cut through the noise. 2 stations remaining. Current scores. Bryce Chambers, 28.6. Landon Blake, 30.0. Bryce turned to look at Landon, and for the first time, there was no smile, no performance, just cold calculation. He'd underestimated this man, treated him like a joke, and now he was losing in front of everyone who'd ever looked up to him. He couldn't let that stand. Whatever it took, he had to win the next 2 stations. Station 4, Mia continued. 200 yards, standing, strong wind conditions. The ventilation system will create cross breeze. Single shot, 60 seconds. This was it. This was where experience with high-tech equipment would matter. Bryce's rifle had sensors that could calculate wind drift. Landon's iron sights would require pure instinct and estimation. As they moved to the new station, Bryce leaned close to Landon and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You're good. I'll give you that. But good isn't enough when the conditions get real." Landon didn't respond. He just walked to his lane, checked the wind flags along the range, and waited for the signal. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that the next two shots would determine everything. The industrial fans, built into ironclad Precision's ventilation system, roared to life, creating a strong cross breeze that swept across the range from left to right. At 200 yards, that wind would push a bullet several inches off course if not properly accounted for. The flags positioned along the range snapped and fluttered, showing the variable gusts and shifts that made this station particularly challenging. Bryce stepped up to lane 8, his confidence visibly returning. This was his domain. He'd trained extensively in wind reading, had invested in equipment specifically designed to take the guesswork out of long-range shooting. His rifle's digital scope included a ballistic calculator that, when paired with the small handheld anemometer he pulled from his pocket, could provide precise holdover adjustments. He made a show of checking the wind speed, consulting his scope's display, and adjusting his position. The crowd watched with renewed interest, many of them nodding approvingly at his professional approach. This was the Bryce they knew, the technical expert who left nothing to chance. Landon stood at lane 9 with his old rifle, watching the wind flags with patient attention. He had no anemometer, no ballistic calculator, no digital assistance of any kind. Just decades of experience reading environmental conditions and trusting his judgment. He'd made shots in mountains where the wind could shift 30 degrees in seconds, in deserts where heat mirage made targets dance and disappear. A climate-controlled shooting range with predictable ventilation patterns was almost relaxing by comparison. The ready signal flashed. 60 seconds on the clock. 60 seconds on the clock. Bryce settled into his stance immediately, working through his calculations with practiced efficiency. He watched his digital readout, made minute adjustments to his scope's turrets, and prepared for the shot. At 35 seconds, he fired. The wind caught the bullet, but his calculations had been good. The display registered 9.4, not perfect, but solid given the conditions. The crowd applauded, relief evident in their response. Bryce was back in form. Landon continued watching the flags, waiting. He was reading patterns, the way the wind gusted and settled, looking for the rhythm. At 48 seconds, he saw what he was waiting for, a brief lull between gusts. He raised the rifle, made a slight adjustment to his aim point based purely on instinct and experience, and fired. The bullet flew true, compensating for the wind with precision that seemed almost supernatural. The display showed 10.0. The crowd's reaction was different this time. There was applause, but it was mixed with something else, a kind of awed confusion. How was he doing this? Without any of the tools that modern precision shooting demanded. Without the technology that everyone assumed was necessary. He was achieving results that shouldn't have been possible. Bryce stared at the display, his knuckles white as he gripped his rifle. The math wasn't adding up. He'd done everything right, used every advantage his equipment provided, and he was still losing. It didn't make sense, unless the problem wasn't the equipment at all. Mia checked her tablet, verifying the scores with the automated system. Current totals: Bryce Chambers, 38.0, Landon Blake, 40.0. One station remained. The crowd had gone from casual spectators to invested audience. Pressing closer to the firing line, phones recording, voices hushed. Some people were frantically texting, spreading word to friends that something extraordinary was happening at Ironclad Precision. The betting exchanges had reversed, money now cautiously shifting toward the underdog. Lily watched from her bench, her hands clasped together so tightly her fingers had gone pale. She'd seen her father shoot before, had watched him teach safety and technique, but she'd never seen him in competition, never witnessed the full extent of what he was capable of. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Seeing this side of him that connected to a past he rarely spoke about, Bryce set his rifle down hard on the bench and turned to face Mia. "What's the final station?" Mia consulted her tablet. "Station 5, 250 yards, shooter's choice of position, obstacle course with moving target. The target will traverse left to right on a motorized track. Single shot. You'll have 90 seconds to engage." Bryce's expression brightened slightly. Moving targets were his specialty. He'd won 3 regional championships with his ability to track and lead moving objects. His rifle scope had a ranging system that could predict target movement and provide a precise lead point. This was where all his advantages would finally matter. "Perfect," Bryce said, his confidence returning. "Let's end this." They moved to the final station, where the range had opened up into its longest bay. At 250 yards, a motorized track system ran parallel to the firing line. Mounted on it was a standard silhouette target that would move at a steady pace once activated. The challenge was to calculate the target's speed, determine the proper lead, and time the shot perfectly so the bullet and target arrived at the same point simultaneously. Bryce took his position, already running calculations. He'd done this drill hundreds of times. The target would move at approximately 3 miles per hour, based on the track system ironclad used. At 250 yards, he'd need roughly a 2-foot lead, adjusted for bullet flight time and trajectory drop. His scope would handle most of that automatically, but the final execution would be pure skill. Landon stood at his lane, watching the empty track with the same patient attention he'd given everything else. No calculations, no technological assistance. Just observation and instinct honed by necessity in places where failure meant consequences far worse than losing a competition. Mia's voice carried across the range. "This is it. Final station. Shooters ready?" Both men nodded. "Target will activate on the ready signal. You have 90 seconds from activation to take your shot." "Good luck," the ready signal flashed. The target began moving, sliding smoothly along its track from left to right at a steady pace. Bryce moved fast, bringing his rifle up and settling into a comfortable sitting position that provided maximum stability. His scope tracked the target, digital readouts feeding him information. He followed the movement, getting a feel for the speed, letting his brain and his technology sync up. At 42 seconds, he had his moment. He pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The bullet flew. The target had a hit indicator that would light up on impact. A bright spot appeared near the target's right shoulder. The scoring system calculated the distance from center mass, 8.9 out of 10, a respectable hit. Especially on a moving target at that distance. The crowd cheered. Many people now firmly convinced that Bryce had found his footing and was about to close the gap. An 8.9 on a moving target was championship level, shooting by any measure, but then they watched as the digital display did the math. Even with a perfect 10.0, Landon would win. Bryce needed Landon to miss or score below 8.9 to have any chance at victory. Landon knelt at his lane, the old rifle steady in his hands. He watched the target complete its traversal and reset to the left side, preparing for another pass. The clock showed 58 seconds remaining. The target began its next pass. Landon followed it with just his eyes at first, not even bringing the rifle to his shoulder. He was reading the movement, internalizing the speed, letting his muscle memory do calculations that his conscious mind couldn't articulate. At 73 seconds. With only 17 seconds remaining, he finally moved. The rifle came up in one smooth motion. He led the target by an amount that looked almost arbitrary, no measurements or technology to guide him. Just instinct built from thousands of repetitions, under conditions that made this controlled range environment Seemed like a casual afternoon. He fired. The bullet crossed 250 yards in a fraction of a second. The target's hit indicator lit up. Dead center. Perfect. 10.0. For a moment, no one moved. The crowd stood frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Then someone started clapping, slow and deliberate, and within seconds, the entire range erupted in applause. Not polite applause or obligatory recognition, but genuine, thunderous appreciation for skill executed at the highest level. The final scores displayed on every screen. Bryce Chambers, 46.9. Landon Blake, 50.0. Perfect. Bryce stood at his lane, staring at the numbers as if they might change if he looked long enough. He'd lost. Not close, not by a controversial point or a technicality. He'd been outshot, decisively and comprehensively, by a man with equipment a fraction as sophisticated as his own. The crowd surged forward. People wanting to congratulate Landon, to shake his hand, to ask questions about where he'd trained and how he'd learned to shoot like that. But Landon had already set down his rifle and turned away from the firing line. He walked straight to Lily, who ran to meet him, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. "You did it," she whispered into his jacket. "We did it," he corrected gently. "You believed in me even when I wasn't sure I should be here. That's what made the difference." Mia approached them, navigating through the crowd. "That was remarkable shooting. I've been running this range for years, and I've never seen anyone shoot a perfect score under those conditions." Landon shrugged. "I had good teachers and a lot of practice in places I'd rather forget about. I'd like to offer you a position as an instructor here," Mia said. "We could use someone with your skill level and your approach. The way you handled yourself today, the composure, the focus, that's exactly what we try to teach." "I appreciate the offer," Landon said, "but I've got a job. Good people depend on me showing up." "Construction work," Mia said, not a question but a statement. "It's honest work, and it pays the bills. That's enough for me." Before Mia could respond, Bryce appeared, pushing through the crowd. His face was flushed, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion. The crowd quieted, sensing potential conflict. "That was," Bryce started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Everyone waited, phones recording, ready to capture whatever came next. Bryce stood there, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, his expensive tactical gear suddenly looking like costume jewelry on someone who'd been exposed as a pretender. The crowd waited in tense silence, phones still recording, everyone wondering if he'd explode in anger or walk away in shame. His reputation was built on being unbeatable at ironclad precision, and that reputation had just been dismantled in front of dozens of witnesses. "That was," Bryce began again, his voice strained, "the best shooting I've ever seen in person." The admission seemed to cost him something fundamental. His shoulders sagged slightly, and when he extended his hand toward Landon, it wasn't the confident gesture of a champion, but the reluctant acknowledgement of someone who'd been humbled. Landon looked at the offered hand for a moment, then shook it firmly but without triumph. "You're a good shooter. Your technique is solid. Your technique is solid." "Not good enough, apparently," Bryce said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He glanced at the crowd, then back at Landon. "Where did you train? I mean, that wasn't just military basic. That was something else." Landon hesitated, his instinct always to deflect, to avoid talking about that part of his life. But Lily squeezed his hand, and he saw in her eyes that she wanted to understand too. She'd heard fragments over the years, mentions of deployments and operations, but he'd always changed the subject, always steered conversations towards safer ground. "Marine Corps Scout Sniper School," Landon said quietly. "Then 3 years with a Special Operations Unit. 2 deployments." The crowd had gone completely silent now, everyone straining to hear. Mia stood nearby, her tablet forgotten in her hands, listening with the focused attention of someone who understood the weight of what was being shared. "How many confirmed?" Bryce started to ask, then stopped himself, seeming to realize the question was inappropriate. Landon's expression hardened slightly. "I don't keep count. That's not something you brag about or turn into a trophy. Those were people, even if they were enemies. Every single shot I took over there meant someone didn't go home to their family." The silence deepened, the reality of what he'd done settling over the crowd like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a game or a sport for him. The skills they'd just watched him demonstrate had been developed and used in contexts where the consequences were permanent and devastating. A voice from the crowd broke the tension. "Then why construction? Why not security or law enforcement or something that uses those skills?" Landon turned to see who'd asked. It was the older man with silver hair who'd been watching earlier. His eyes were knowing, and there was a small insignia on his jacket that suggested his own military background. "Because I wanted to build things instead of destroy them," Landon said simply. "Seemed like a better way to spend the rest of my life." The man nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, can I tell them why we really came today?" Landon looked down at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "About Mom," she said softly. "About the promise." Something flickered across Landon's face, pain and love and reluctance all mixed together. He knelt down beside her, speaking quietly even though everyone was watching. "You don't have to, sweetheart." "I want to," she insisted. "They should know." Landon studied her face for a long moment, then nodded and stood. Lily turned to face the crowd, suddenly looking very small and very brave. "My mom died 2 years ago," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "She was a nurse, and she got sick. Before she passed, she made my dad promise something." The crowd leaned in, and several people lowered their phones, sensing this was a moment that shouldn't be performed or packaged for social media. Lily continued. "She told him that the world would try to make him angry, that it would try to make him feel like he had to prove himself all the time because of what he did in the war. But she made him promise to show me that real strength isn't about being the loudest or having the best stuff. It's about being calm when everyone else is losing control." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and Landon placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "We came here today because I asked him to," Lily said. "I wanted to see if what Mom said was true. If he could walk into a place like this where everyone had better equipment and look down on us and still be strong without getting angry or mean." She looked up at her father, tears streaming down her face now. "And he did. Even when people made fun of us, even when that guy," she gestured at Bryce, "said those things, Dad stayed calm. He didn't shoot perfect because he wanted to win. He shot perfect because he wanted to keep the promise he made to Mom." The silence that followed was profound. Several people in the crowd wiped at their eyes. Bryce stood frozen, the full weight of his earlier behavior crashing down on him. He'd mocked a widower and his daughter, had tried to humiliate them for entertainment, and all along they'd been there for reasons so much deeper than he could have imagined. Mia was the first to move. She walked over to Lily and knelt down beside her. "Your mom sounds like she was a very wise person." "She was," Lily said, smiling through her tears. "She always knew the right thing to say." Mia stood and looked at Landon. "I meant what I said about the instructor position. Not because of how you shoot, but because of why you shoot. That's the kind of mindset we should be teaching here." "I'll think about it," Landon said. Though his tone suggested he probably wouldn't, the older man with the silver hair stepped forward, extending his hand. "Colonel James Patterson, retired. I commanded a Marine infantry battalion in Desert Storm. What your wife taught you, what you're teaching your daughter. That's the lesson I spent 30 years trying to get through. to young officers who thought warfare was about firepower and aggression. Landon shook his hand. "Thank you, sir." "No," Patterson said firmly. "Thank you for remembering that the skills we learn in war should make us better people in peace, not just more dangerous ones." Others began to approach, not for autographs or photos, but to shake Landon's hand, to tell their own stories, to share their own losses and lessons. The shooting competition had become something else entirely, a catalyst for a conversation about what strength really meant and what veterans owed themselves and their families after service ended. Bryce stood apart from the group, watching. His friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment, but he remained. After several minutes, when the crowd had thinned slightly, he approached Landon again. "I owe you an apology," Bryce said. "Not just for today, but for the attitude I brought. I've been treating this range like it's my personal stage, like shooting is about ego and dominance. You just reminded me what it should actually be about." Landon regarded him for a moment. "You're young. You've got time to figure it out. Will you teach me?" Bryce asked, the question catching Landon off guard. "Not technique, I mean, obviously you could teach me that too. But the other part. The discipline. The purpose. I don't want to be just a good shooter anymore. I want to be a good man who happens to shoot." Landon glanced at Lily, who nodded encouragingly. He looked back at Bryce and saw something in the younger man's eyes that hadn't been there before. Genuine humility and a willingness to learn. "Show up at the Copper Hill construction site on Monday morning," Landon said. 5 a.m. Bring work gloves and a willingness to take instruction without ego. Bryce blinked, confused. "Construction site? You want to learn discipline and purpose. You learn it by building something that helps other people. Shooting is a skill. How you use that skill, that's character. Character is built through service, not competition." Bryce absorbed this, then nodded slowly. 5 a.m., I'll be there." As Bryce walked away, Mia approached with her tablet. The range's security cameras captured everything. "With your permission, I'd like to use clips from today for our instructor training program. Not the shooting, the other part. The way you handled yourself, the conversation afterward. That's what people need to see." "No faces," Landon said. "Especially not Lily's. If you use it, blur us out. This isn't about us." "Understood," Mia said, making notes on her tablet. The crowd had mostly dispersed now, people returning to their lanes or heading out, but the energy in the building had changed. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Several shooters had put away their phones and were actually talking to each other instead of performing for cameras. Landon packed up his rifle case one final time, checking to make sure Lily had all her belongings. As they headed toward the exit, Colonel Patterson caught up with them one more time. "Mr. Blake, there's a veterans group that meets in Copper Hill on Thursday evenings. Just coffee and conversation, nothing formal. But we could use someone like you, someone who understands that coming home is just the beginning of the journey." Landon took the card Patterson offered. "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," Patterson said, then added with a knowing smile, "Your wife would probably want you to go." Landon smiled despite himself. She probably would. The parking lot of ironclad Precision Range was bathed in the orange glow of late afternoon sun as Landon and Lily walked toward his battered truck. The contrast between where they were leaving and where they were going felt almost symbolic. From the gleaming luxury of the shooting facility back to the worn simplicity of their everyday life. Lily was quiet, processing everything that had happened. She'd watched her father compete, watched him win, watched him share parts of his past he usually kept locked away. But more than that, she'd seen the way people looked at him afterward. Not with mockery or dismissal, but with respect and something that looked like gratitude. As Landon opened the truck door for her, she turned to him suddenly. "Dad, why don't you ever talk about the war stuff?" The question hung in the air between them. Landon had known it would come eventually. Lily was getting older, becoming more aware of the gaps in his history, the medals he kept in a drawer instead of displaying, the photographs he'd put away after her mother died. He leaned against the truck, looking out across the parking lot at the expensive cars and manicured landscaping. Because the person I was over there isn't the person I want to be now. When you're in combat, you have to become someone hard, someone who can make terrible decisions without hesitation. That person kept me alive, kept my team alive, but he's not someone I'm proud of. But you were protecting people, Lily said. Mom told me you saved lives. I did, Landon acknowledged. But I also took lives. And no matter how justified it was, no matter how necessary, that changes you. It marks you in ways that don't wash off. Lily absorbed this, her young mind working through concepts too heavy for her age but trying anyway. Is that why you build things now? To balance it out? Landon looked at his daughter with amazement. Her mother's wisdom was alive in her, that ability to cut through complexity and find the heart of things. Yeah, he said softly. That's exactly why. Every building I help construct, every home I help repair, it's like I'm adding weight to the other side of the scale. Doesn't erase what I did, but it gives me something to point to when I wonder if my life has been worth the cost. Mom thought your life was worth it, Lily said firmly. She told me once that you were the bravest person she'd ever known, not because you went to war, but because you came back and chose to be gentle. Landon felt his throat tighten. 2 years after losing her, his wife could still reach through time and say exactly what he needed to hear. He pulled Lily into a hug, holding her close while the parking lot emptied around them. When they separated, Lily wiped her eyes and smiled. So what happens now? Now we go home, order pizza, and you do your homework while I fix Mrs. Chun's porch railing like I promised. That's not what I meant, Lily said. I mean, everything changed today. Those people in there, they want you to teach them. That guy Bryce wants to learn from you. Colonel Patterson wants you to join his group. What are you going to do? Landon climbed into the truck and started the engine, which turned over with its usual reluctant sputter. I'm going to do what I always do. Take care of you, show up for work, help our neighbors, and try to be someone your mother would still recognize. But what about helping those people? Lily pressed. What about teaching them what you taught me today? Landon pulled out of the parking lot, pointing the truck toward their neighborhood on the other side of Copper Hill. I didn't teach you anything today. You already knew it. Your mom spent years showing you what strength looks like. I just reminded you. They drove in silence for a while, passing through the wealthy district where ironclad precision was located, then crossing the railroad tracks that divided Copper Hill into its 2 distinct halves. On this side, the houses were smaller, the lawns less perfect, the cars older. This was where people worked with their hands, where rent checks were carefully planned, where community meant more than convenience. As they passed the construction site where Landon spent his days, Lily pointed to the half-finished office building. What's that going to be? Medical offices, Landon said. Doctors, dentists, physical therapy. Should be finished by spring. You're helping build a place that will help sick people get better, Lily observed. That's pretty cool. It's just construction. No, it's not, Lily insisted. It's what you said before. It's balance. You're building something that will help people for years and years. How many people will get better because you helped build that place? Landon had never thought about it that way. To him, construction was just work, a way to pay bills and stay busy. But hearing Lily frame it as service, as contribution, shifted something in his perspective. They pulled into the driveway of their small rental house, a 2-bedroom cottage with peeling paint and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And Landon had spent the last 2 years making it as comfortable as he could for Lily. Mrs. Chun, their elderly neighbor, was sitting on her own porch next door, waving at them as they arrived. Her railing had been loose for weeks, a safety hazard that Landon had promised to fix, but kept putting off because work ran late and he was always tired. "Give me 10 minutes to change," Landon told Lily. "Then I'll get started on Mrs. Chun's railing before it gets dark." But when he came back outside in his work clothes, tools in hand, he found Mrs. Chun's porch already occupied. Bryce Chambers was there, along with 2 other young men from the shooting range, examining the loose railing with careful attention. Landon stopped, confused. "What are you doing here?" Bryce looked up, slightly embarrassed. "You said to show up Monday morning for construction work. I figured I'd get a head start. Hope that's okay. I didn't give you my address." "Range manager lady helped me out," Bryce admitted. "Said you lived next to someone who needed help, and I should make myself useful. These guys," he gestured to his companions, "wanted to come too." One of them, a stocky man in his 20s, stepped forward. "I'm Seth Newman. Was at the range today. What you said about building instead of destroying, that hit home. I'm a plumber by trade. If there's anything here that needs fixing beyond carpentry, I can help." The other man, older with graying temples, nodded. "Patrick Bowen, retired Navy. I've been looking for a way to be useful since I got out. Figured helping fix up a neighborhood is as good a purpose as any." Landon stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of help he hadn't asked for. Mrs. Chun emerged from her house, delighted by all the attention. "Your father is very popular," she told Lily in her accented English. "So many young men want to learn from him." Lily grinned. "Yeah, he's pretty great." Landon shook his head, but he was smiling. "All right, if you're here to work, let's work. Bryce, you and Seth take measurements on this railing. Patrick, check the porch supports underneath. I want to make sure this is structurally sound before we replace anything." They worked as the sun set. This improvised crew of strangers, brought together by a shooting competition that had become about something more than accuracy. Mrs. Chun brought out lemonade. Lily did her homework on the porch steps, looking up occasionally to watch her father teach these men the same patient, careful approach he brought to everything. By the time darkness fell, the railing was fixed, the supports reinforced, and Mrs. Chun's porch was safer than it had been in years. The men stood back, admiring their work with satisfaction that came from tangible accomplishment. "Same time Monday?" Bryce asked as they prepared to leave. 5 a.m., Landon confirmed. "And bring breakfast. We've got a full day ahead of us." After they left, Landon and Lily sat on their own porch, eating pizza straight from the box. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of distant traffic and crickets beginning their evening chorus. "Mom would be proud of you," Lily said between bites. "She'd be proud of you too," Landon replied. "You were brave today. Speaking in front of all those people, sharing something so personal. That took courage." "I learned from the best," Lily said, leaning against his shoulder. 3 weeks passed before Landon realized how much had changed. It started small, just Bryce and his 2 friends showing up at the construction site on that first Monday morning. Landon had expected them to last maybe a day, maybe a week before the early hours and physical labor wore down their enthusiasm. But they kept coming back. Bryce proved surprisingly capable with a hammer once he stopped trying to impress everyone and just focused on the work. Seth's plumbing skills came in handy when the site's temporary water system developed issues. Patrick, with his Navy background, understood the importance of precision and following procedures, which made him invaluable for the detail work. But more than their skills, it was their attitude that surprised Landon. They listened. They asked questions. They showed up on time and stayed late without complaint. They were learning not just about construction, but about the discipline and purpose Landon had mentioned that day at the range. Word spread in ways Landon hadn't anticipated. The video clips that Mia had captured, carefully edited with faces blurred as Landon requested, had been incorporated into ironclad precision's training materials. But somehow, snippets had leaked beyond that, shared on social media by people who'd been there that day. The shooting wasn't what captured people's attention. It was the conversation afterward, the story of the promise to a dying wife, the lesson about strength and humility. Landon's phone, which usually only rang for work calls and Lily's school, started getting messages from veterans he hadn't heard from in years. Old teammates reaching out to say they'd heard what happened, that they were proud of him, that they were struggling with similar questions about how to be good men after doing hard things. Colonel Patterson's Thursday evening veterans group, which Landon had finally attended after Lily insisted, grew from 6 regulars to over 20 within 2 weeks. They met at a community center in Copper Hill, drinking cheap coffee and sharing stories, trying to help each other navigate the gap between who they'd been in uniform and who they wanted to become in civilian life. That at one of these meetings, a younger veteran named Mitchell Rhodes, who'd served in Afghanistan and was struggling with PTSD, broke down while talking about how angry he felt all the time. The group listened without judgment as he described feeling like a weapon that had been discarded, trained for violence but expected to slot peacefully back into society. Landon, who usually stayed quiet during these sessions, spoke up. "You're not a weapon. You never were. You're a person who was asked to do weapon-like things. There's a difference. A weapon doesn't get a choice. You do. Every single day, you choose whether the skills you learned and the things you did define you or inform you. How do you make that choice?" Mitchell asked, his voice raw. "By building something," Landon said. "Doesn't have to be buildings, though that works for me. Could be relationships, could be art, could be helping other people who are where you are now. The point is to create instead of destroy, to add instead of subtract. You do that enough times, eventually you start to believe you're more than what the war made you." The room was silent, everyone absorbing this. Colonel Patterson nodded approvingly from his corner. After the meeting, Mitchell approached Landon privately. "You hiring at that construction site? You know anything about construction?" Landon asked. "Not a thing. But I know how to follow orders, work as a team, and show up when I say I will." Landon handed him a business card for the site foreman. "Be there Monday, 5 a.m. Tell him I sent you." The following Saturday, Lily had a parent-teacher conference. Landon showed up in his cleanest work shirt, cement dust still embedded under his fingernails despite scrubbing. Her teacher, Ms. Delilah Fox, greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Blake, thank you for coming. I wanted to talk to you about Lily." Landon tensed, expecting problems. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful," Ms. Fox assured him. "Lily wrote an essay last week about heroes. Most students wrote about athletes or celebrities. Lily wrote about you, about a promise you made to her mother and how you keep it every single day. It was the most moving piece of writing I've read in 15 years of teaching." She handed him a printed copy. Landon read it slowly, seeing his life through his daughter's eyes. She'd written about the shooting range, about watching people mock him and seeing him stay calm. She'd written about the construction site and how he taught other veterans to build things. But mostly, she'd written about the quiet ways he showed strength. Making her breakfast every morning, helping neighbors, never raising his voice even when frustrated. The last paragraph read, "My dad isn't a hero because he was in a war. He's a hero because he came home from war and chose to be kind. That's harder than being brave in a battle. That's being brave every single day when no one is watching." Landon's vision blurred as he read it. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. "She wants to be like you," Miss Fox said gently. "That's a powerful legacy to leave someone. I'm just trying not to mess her up too badly, Landon said, attempting humor to cover his emotion. You're doing better than that. Much better. That evening, as Landon was preparing dinner, someone knocked on the door. He opened it to find Mia Davis standing on his porch, looking slightly uncertain, the first time he'd seen her appear anything less than completely confident. "Miss Davis," Landon said, surprised. "Is there a problem at the range?" "No problem. But I wanted to talk to you about something. Can I come in?" Landon stepped aside, letting her enter. Lily looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, curious. Mia got straight to the point. "Ironclad Precision wants to start a new program. We're calling it Precision Purpose. The goal is to teach shooting skills the way you demonstrated that day, as a form of discipline and focus rather than ego and competition. We want you to design the curriculum and oversee the instructors. I already told you, I have a job," Landon said. "This would be evenings and weekends. Pay is competitive. But more importantly, it would give you a platform to teach what you've been teaching those veterans who show up at your construction site. We've had over 100 inquiries from veterans who heard about what happened and want that kind of mentorship." Landon shook his head. "I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not someone who should be put on a platform." "That's exactly why you should be," Mia countered. "Because you don't want it. Because you're doing this for the right reasons. The veterans who reach out, they're not looking for someone to tell them they're heroes. They're looking for someone to show them how to be normal again. You're the only person I've met who actually understands that." Lily spoke up from the table. "Dad, you should do it. Mom would want you to help them." Landon looked at his daughter, then at Mia. "Let me think about it." "That's all I ask," Mia said, leaving her card on the counter. "But think fast. We've got people waiting." After she left, Landon sat at the table with Lily, both of them quiet for a long moment. "Are you scared?" Lily asked. "Terrified," Landon admitted. "What if I can't help them? What if I say the wrong thing? You helped Bryce. You helped Mitchell. You help people every day just by being you. Why would this be different?" "Because it would be official, organized. I'd be responsible." Lily reached across the table and took his hand. "You're already responsible for all those people. They're already coming to you. This would just give you better tools to help them." Landon squeezed her hand gently, amazed as always by her wisdom. She was 12 years old, but spoke with the clarity of someone much older, her mother's gift passed down and growing stronger. "When did you get so smart?" he asked. "I learned from the 2 best teachers in the world," she said simply. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Landon sat on the porch with a beer he barely touched, thinking about promises and responsibility, about the difference between what he wanted and what was needed. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of distant cars and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. His phone buzzed, with a text from Colonel Patterson. "Thursday's meeting. 27 attendees. 3 new guys drove 4 hours to be there. They're asking for you specifically. Think about what that means." Landon thought about it. He thought about Mitchell and Bryce and all the others who were trying to figure out how to carry their training into peacetime without letting it define them negatively. He thought about his wife, who'd always seen people not for what they were, but for what they could become with the right support. And he thought about the promise he'd made. Not just to show Lily what strength looked like, but to be the kind of man worthy of the faith his wife had placed in him. He pulled out his phone and texted Mia, "Let's talk about the curriculum. But I have conditions." Her response came within seconds. "Name them." "No publicity. No commercialization. This is about service, not profit. Anyone who comes through the program agrees to volunteer in their community afterward. And Lily helps design the family component, because this affects whole households, not just the veterans." 3 dots appeared as Mia typed then. "Deal. When can you start?" Landon looked at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. feeling the weight of new responsibility settling on his shoulders alongside the old burdens he'd carried for years. Monday, he typed. Always Monday. 6 months later, the community center in Copperhill had been transformed. What was once a dusty storage room now served as the headquarters for Precision Purpose, the program that Mia and Landon had built together. The walls were lined with photographs not of trophies or competitions, but of veterans working together on community projects, building wheelchair ramps, renovating youth centers, teaching firearm safety to responsible citizens. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, the space filled with people seeking something they couldn't find anywhere else. Veterans learning to channel their training into service. Family members trying to understand their loved ones better. Young people looking for mentorship from those who'd seen darkness and chosen light. Landon stood at the front of the room, addressing a group of 15 newcomers. Bryce Chambers sat in the second row, now a certified instructor himself, no longer wearing designer tactical gear, but simple work clothes that bore the honest stains of construction and community service. Beside him sat Mitchell Rhodes, who'd gone from struggling with rage to becoming a peer counselor, helping other veterans navigate their transitions. Precision isn't about perfection, Landon was saying, his voice steady and calm. It's about intentionality. Every action you take, every word you speak, every decision you make, ask yourself, does this build or does this break? Does this add value to the world or subtract from it? Lily sat at a desk in the corner, now 13, and helping manage the program's scheduling and family outreach. She'd become the heart of Precision Purpose in ways even Landon hadn't anticipated, connecting with the families of veterans, helping spouses and relatives understand that healing was a collective journey. After the session ended, a woman approached Landon hesitantly. Her eyes were red from crying during his presentation. My husband served 3 tours. He came back different, angry all the time. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. Is he here tonight? Landon asked gently. She nodded toward a man standing near the door, arms crossed defensively. He didn't want to come. I made him. Landon walked over to the man, extending his hand. I'm Landon. Thanks for being here. The man stared at the offered hand for a long moment before shaking it. Seth told me about this place. Said you helped him. Seth helped himself, Landon corrected. I just gave him some tools and a different target to aim at. 3 months later, that same man was leading a workshop on veteran spouse communication. His wife beside him, both of them teaching others what they'd learned about rebuilding trust and connection. The ripple effects kept spreading. Construction crews led by Precision Purpose graduates had renovated 12 homes for elderly residents across Copperhill. A mobile crisis team staffed by program veterans was providing peer support to those struggling with transition challenges. Local schools had started inviting program members to speak about service, sacrifice, and choosing purpose over pride on a quiet Sunday morning. Landon and Lily visited the cemetery where her mother was buried. They brought fresh flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone. I kept the promise, Landon said softly, as if his wife could hear him. And it became something bigger than I imagined. Lily leaned against his shoulder. She knew it would. That's why she made you promise. As they walked back to the truck, Lily asked, Dad, do you think we're done? Is this enough? Landon looked at his daughter, seeing not just the young woman she was becoming, but the legacy of love and wisdom that lived on through her. We're never done, he said. Every person we help goes out and helps someone else. That's how promises become movements. That's how one quiet shot echoes forever. They drove home through Copperhill, past the construction site where veterans worked alongside civilians, past the community center where healing happened in whispers rather than shouts, past neighborhoods made stronger by people who'd learned that true precision meant hitting the target that mattered most, purpose. The loudest impact doesn't come from the shot itself. It comes from the steady aim of a promise kept, one day at a time, one person at a time. Until silence becomes strength, and strength becomes legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.